Imagine handing the exact same mathematical formula to, like, 3 expert engineers.
Right.
They all do the math perfectly. But when they hand their papers back, you are looking at 3 entirely different answers.
Which sounds impossible, because math is math.
Exactly. But in the world of cross-language programming, math is rarely just math. It turns out the language you speak fundamentally changes the truth you calculate.
It really is the ultimate translation minefield.
Yeah.
Because the process of porting logic from one language to another, it reveals all these hidden quirks, like compiler assumptions and memory management philosophies that you probably never even realized were shaping your calculations.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a fascinating 2026 presentation from a developer who goes by the handle at Lus036.
Yeah, the presentation is titled Diagraphics, Network Optimization in Python, Rust, and C++ Lists.
And our mission today is to explore what happens when you attempt the impossible, like building a bit-for-bit identical complex optimization engine in 3 completely different programming paradigms.
It's a massive undertaking.
It really is. I mean, have you ever wondered how much your choice of language actually matters when the underlying math is supposed to be identical? Okay, let's unpack this.
So just to set the stage here, this developer created 3 sibling projects. There's Diagraphics in Python, Diagraphics down to Rust, and Diagraph a CP and EP in C++20.
And the premise is incredibly rigorous, right?
Oh, absolutely. They implemented a suite of advanced network optimization algorithms across all 3. We're talking heavy-hitting stuff like Howard's method for negative cycle detection.
Oh, wow.
And min-cost flow solvers. But they didn't just want them to compile and work. They forced all 3 implementations to yield identical numerical results, down to the final bit.
Which sounds pretty straightforward, until you look at the sheer footprint required to build the exact same tool in these 3 environments. Let's just look at the raw lines of code for a second.
That's a huge disparity.
Yeah, Python pulls off the whole suite in about 700 lines.
Right.
But then C++ needs around 1,000 lines, and Rust takes roughly 1,500 lines.
So that's literally more than double the size of the Python code base, just to accomplish the exact same functional outcome.
It's basically like translating a hyper-specific architectural blueprint.
How do you mean?
Well, Python lets you just hand the builder a quick sketch, It's highly readable, gets the gist across instantly.
Sure, yeah.
And then C++ is the standard technical manual, very precise, but it assumes, the structural engineering basics.
And Rust.
Rust acts like a relentless city inspector that refuses to issue your building permit until you prove, mathematically, that your scaffolding won't collapse when 2 different workers step on it at the exact same time.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize the strictness of the Rust compiler, with its ownership and borrow-checking rules.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating here is how the developer chose to manage this translation process. Because to ensure true parity between the languages, they aligned the variable names across all 3 code bases.
Okay, so keeping things visually identical.
Exactly. The source node is always called 8x, the target node is always VTX, the edge weight is W.
So it basically strips away the accents and gives us a Rosetta Stone for the code.
Yes.
You can literally put the Python script and the Rust script side by side on your monitor and follow the exact same logical thread, just variable by variable.
Right. And when you eliminate those stylistic differences, you basically prove that the core structural logic can transcend the syntax.
So the naming conventions match perfectly. But, a matching variable name doesn't save you if you blow out the system's RAM.
No, it definitely doesn't.
If you search a massive graph for negative cycles and try to hold every single possible route in memory at once, the whole thing just crashes.
Right. They had to change the fundamental architecture across all 3 languages to extract data without, overwhelming the system.
Which brings us to the generator pattern.
Yeah, the generator pattern was the definitive solution here. Initially, if we look at the Rust API, it was designed to return at most 1 negative cycle at a time.
Like a single vector of weights.
Exactly, a vec of weight. But the problem is the max parametric solver, which is a core part of this whole suite, it doesn't just need a cycle. It needs to evaluate many options.
To pick the absolute best cycle for finding the lowest zero cancel value.
Precisely.
Well, I have to push back here on behalf of anyone listening who's maybe thinking about this practically.
Sure.
Why go through the headache of creating a complex generator to drip feed the results one by one? Why not just have the code do a massive sweep, find every single possible cycle, put them in a giant list, and just return the whole list at once?
So the solver can just sort it and pick the winner.
Yeah, exactly. Just sort it out.
It comes down to the brutal reality of algorithmic complexity.
Mhm.
The search space in these graphs is, well, it's astronomically large.
Okay.
If you try to compile a master list of every single cycle, your program will likely hang out of sheer computational exhaustion. It would crash before it ever even gets to the sorting phase.
Oh, wow.
So the algorithm uses a loop structure that essentially says, while not found, and relax.
Meaning you just keep relaxing the graph, like testing edge weights to see if a shorter path exists until you find the specific criteria you need.
Right.
And the second you find it, you just kill the search to save compute power.
Exactly. You iterate over all possible cycle starts in the predecessor graph, and generating them one by one prevents massive amounts of wasted computation.
That makes sense.
In Python, this drip feed mechanism is handled beautifully by the native yield keyword. It naturally suspends and resumes the function's state.
And in C++ day.
In C++, though, they utilized coyield alongside a specific generator library.
But Rust, being the relentless city inspector, made them work for it.
It really did. They brought in a crate called Genowator SyncGen, but immediately hit a wall with some really tricky lifetime issues.
And the fix for this is fascinating to me, because it touches on how Rust fundamentally views memory.
Right.
They had to annotate the closure return type to coerce the async block into a pinboxed-in future.
Yeah. And to understand why that specific technical mechanism is required, we have to look at what an asynchronous generator actually is under the hood.
Okay, lay it on me.
In Rust, an async block compiles down to a state machine. It has internal variables, and sometimes those variables point to other data within that exact same state machine.
A self-referential struct.
Exactly.
And if that state machine gets moved to a different location in the computer's memory while the generator is suspended, all those internal pointers are suddenly just pointing at empty space.
Yes, which is a dangling pointer. That's a massive security and stability risk.
Which is exactly what Rust was built to avoid.
That is the core of Rust's philosophy, yeah.
Yeah.
Preventing dangling pointers at compile time. So by using box, the developer takes that state machine and places it on the heap, where its size is clearly defined.
And then by using pin, they essentially nail it to the floor.
Basically, yeah. Pin provides a mathematical guarantee to the compiler that this data will never be moved in memory until it is safely dropped.
It's an incredibly elegant fix, because it clearly defines the memory contract, so the compiler knows exactly how to safely handle the state of that generator between each yielded cycle.
Right.
And it successfully unifies the architecture across all three languages.
The blueprints are unified, yes. The generator pattern works.
But then those blueprints have to survive the unforgiving reality of how different languages handle basic data structures. And here's where it gets really interesting to me.
Oh yeah, the bugs.
The whole assumption that math is just math completely falls apart when you're porting from Python to Rust and C++ base, starting with graph representation.
Right. Python dictionaries, since version 3.7, maintain their insertion order.
But Rust and C++ use hash maps that are explicitly non-deterministic.
Yeah, so if you iterate over a hash map in Rust, the items will come out in a seemingly randomized order, and that order changes every single time you run the program.
Which feels like a huge bug if you're coming from Python. Like, why would Rust intentionally scramble the order of your data?
Well, it is actually a crucial security feature. It protects against what's called a hash DOS attack.
A denial of service attack.
Oh, exactly. If a malicious actor figures out your hash function, they can intentionally feed your server thousands of keys that all map to the exact same bucket.
Oh, I see.
It degrades the lightning-fast O of one lookup time into a sluggish O of n lookup time, completely freezing your system.
The Rust prioritizes security, so it randomizes the hash seeds by default to prevent this.
Yes. While Python 3.7 and later prioritized predictable insertion order for developer convenience.
That is such a brilliant tension between security and convenience.
Yeah.
But man, it creates a nightmare when you are trying to force two languages to output identical results.
It really does.
Because if your optimization algorithm accidentally relies on the order in which data was inserted, it will work flawlessly in Python every single time and then fail unpredictably in Rust.
And that non-determinism exposed a really nasty bug during their negative cycle detection.
Using the Bellman-Ford algorithm, right?
Right, which works by iteratively relaxing the edges of the graph to find the shortest path. And to reconstruct the actual cycle once it's found, you have to track the predecessor edges, basically leaving a trail of breadcrumbs.
But the developer tried to be clever in the Rust port, and they used a second separate pass over the data to reconstruct those predecessor edges.
Yeah, and because the hash map order was randomized, if the graph had multiple paths with the exact same cost, that second pass might arbitrarily evaluate the edges in a totally different sequence than the first pass did.
So it grabs a completely different breadcrumb trail.
Exactly.
It grabs a different route that just happens to have the same weight, completely desynchronizing the state of the algorithm.
It's a mess.
But it proves you have to track your state in a single definitive pass when you're dealing with non-deterministic structures.
Absolutely. And, that wasn't even the only mathematical ghost they encountered. They also ran into a massive headache caused by float truncation.
Okay, this goes back to the core premise for me. Shouldn't basic arithmetic just be arithmetic?
You'd think so. But in Python, when the developer calculated a distance and needed it as a whole number, they used int of dist times 100.
Okay.
And when you cast a float to an integer in Python, it simply truncates the decimal. It just chops it off.
But in the initial Rust port, they use the dot round method.
Right. And truncation just drops the decimal entirely. But dot round mathematically evaluates the decimal and rounds up or down to the nearest whole number.
Right.
That tiny, tiny semantic difference caused a literal 1-unit cost discrepancy in the final massive optimization output.
1 single unit.
Wow. And on top of that, there was a miswritten formula for a variable called eta. Python used the formula floor of the square root of t minus 1.
But the initial compiled ports use the square root of t minus 1.
Yes. They just missed the floor function entirely.
That one little missing function altered the entire trajectory of the calculation.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the most critical lesson of the entire presentation. A compiling program just means the syntax is valid. It does not mean the semantics are mathematically equivalent.
That's a great way to put it.
You can never blindly trust ported code. You must rigorously validate the floating point semantics and the algorithm states in a single pass.
So to prove they had actually conquered these semantic ghosts, the randomized hash maps, the missing floor functions, the truncation errors, the developer needed a crucible.
A stress test.
A stress test to prove these algorithms were fundamentally aligned. And that brings us to the spare TSV assignment problem, which is solved using the cycle-canceling min-cost flow algorithm.
Let's just call it the MCF for short.
Good call. The MCF algorithm operates on a really complex network of nodes.
Right. You have primal nodes with a demand of -1, meaning they need a connection. You have spare nodes with 0 demand acting as intermediaries.
Okay.
And a sink node that absorbs the flow with a demand of +n. Every edge between them has a capacity constraint, which in this case was a capacity of 4.
I try to picture this as water finding the path of least resistance through a series of pipes. But it has this crucial economic twist.
How so?
The algorithm first forces a feasible flow, like just greedily routes the water from the source to the sink just to get the system running.
Right.
Then it builds a residual graph to see where the flow could be adjusted to make the whole system cheaper.
Exactly, because forward edges cost weight, meaning it literally costs money to send more water that way. But backward edges cost negative weight.
Meaning you get a refund if you cancel that existing flow.
Exactly.
So the water is actively hunting for negative resistance loops. It's artificially lowering the system's total water bill by finding these negative cycles, using that Bellman-Ford method, canceling them out to get the refund, and then repeating the process until the bill is as low as it can possibly go.
And to test this, the developer ran a highly controlled fixture test to verify the descent. It was 12 nodes, 121 edges.
And if this were a normal project, you'd expect a slight variance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a fraction of a decimal off due to how the different languages interpret those negative weights.
Yeah.
But because they forced absolute deterministic parity, I'm guessing they didn't just get similar costs, they got a mathematically flawless match across the board.
They did. Every single solver found the exact same total cost of 264.
Amazing.
And not just the final number. Every single individual edge's flow matched perfectly. Python, Rust, and C++ all built the exact same residual graphs. They found the exact same negative cycles and executed the exact same cancellations.
They proved the cycle-canceling descent is entirely deterministic. Even with all those underlying language philosophies clashing, the refined code produced absolute parity.
Yep, same breadth first search initial flow, flawless execution across all 3 languages.
We know they can get the exact same answer bit for bit. So the only question left for this deep dive is the benchmark showdown.
Oh, the speed test.
Who gets there fastest when we scale this up?
So for the final benchmark, they used a massive 195 node, 684 edge spare TSV test.
And the results are staggering. Python clocked in at 12.36 seconds.
Right.
Rust finished in 0.65 seconds. And C++ finished in 0.63 seconds.
So Rust and C++ are practically tied. I mean, they are within 4% of each other, which essentially amounts to a rounding error in hardware timing.
But they absolutely obliterated Python. They ran roughly 19 times faster.
19 times.
That is the difference between waiting for a heavy web page to load and waiting for a physical letter in the mail. It fundamentally changes how you interact with the software.
It really does. And the benchmarks also prove that this speed up actually grows as the problem size increases.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In large data sets, compiled languages heavily amortize their startup costs, whereas Python is forced to interpret line by line, object by object.
Right.
So the larger the graph, the more Python's interpreter overhead acts as a massive drag on the system.
Which naturally leads to the question, why would you ever use Python for this if it's 19 times slower?
Because of the lumber required to build the house. It's 700 lines of code versus 1,500.
Ah, right.
Python is the ultimate tool for prototyping. You can build the core logic, test the complex mathematics of the min-cost flow, and just wrap your head around the algorithms rapidly without constantly fighting a compiler over memory allocations.
You prove the math works in the sketch before you hire the city inspector.
Exactly.
But when it's time for production and you actually need that 19x speed up, you port it.
You utilize Rust when you want maximum performance combined with strict memory safety guarantees and, fearless concurrency.
And C++.
You utilize C++ when you are integrating with existing heavy-duty infrastructure that already heavily relies on the C++ ecosystem. Each language has a highly specific place in the development lifecycle.
So what does this all mean? We've gone from shorthand architectural blueprints and memory state machines
Yeah.
to hunting for negative water bills to a 19x speed showdown.
Well, it provides a very deliberate roadmap for cross-language development. First, you have to deeply understand the underlying algorithm. Second, port the code, keeping in mind that identical syntax does not guarantee identical semantics.
Right.
Third, rigorously validate the precise numeric output, bit-for-bit tracking state in a single pass. And only then, fourth, do you benchmark for speed.
That's a great framework.
The presentation wraps up with a fantastic motto for modern engineering. Make it work in Python. Make it fast in Rust. Make it robust in C++.
It's a perfect encapsulation of the developer's journey.
It is. But this also raises a really important question, something for you to consider as we conclude today's deep dive.
What's that?
We're moving rapidly into an era where developers are leaning heavily on automated tools and AI to port legacy logic from old languages into fast, modern ones like Rust.
Oh yeah, everyone's doing it.
And we just explored how a single missing floor function or a subtle semantic switch from truncate to round completely altered the cost calculations in a highly controlled environment.
Right, because the AI might translate the syntax perfectly, making it compile beautifully and satisfying the borrow checker, but completely miss the subtle mathematical quirks of the original language's interpreter.
Exactly. Given how easily those semantic ghosts hide in compiling code, you really have to wonder, how many silent one-unit mathematical errors are currently slipping into the world's production code right now?
That's a scary thought.
We might be trusting the translation layer way too much, bypassing this rigorous bit-for-bit cross-validation simply because the AI handed us a script that runs without crashing.
It is a terrifying thought for any systems engineer. We started today talking about how math is supposed to be a universal truth. 2 + 2 is 4. But it turns out the language you use to ask the question fundamentally shapes how the truth gets calculated. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.